welcome to episode 25 of Ping, a Firewalls.com podcast, a bi-weekly look at cybersecurity, including interviews, news, expert tips, and the latest trends. I'm Kevin Baxter, and I'm joined by my Firewalls.com colleague, Andrew Harmon.
Hi.
Hey, Andrew. As we tackle a different featured topic each episode. New episodes are out every other Wednesday, so subscribe or follow on your favorite podcasting platform to get the latest first. Ratings and reviews are always appreciated, and you can drop us a line anytime at podcast@firewalls.com. As always, thanks for listening, and now it's time to introduce our featured topic and our guests, plural, for this episode.
When you consider network security options, finding the best solution for you means solutions that cater to your priorities. One word you'll see a lot on products, compliance. And one of the most well-known and widespread security rules for U.S. organizations to follow is HIPAA. For those unfamiliar, the HIPAA security rule requires appropriate administrative, physical, and technical safeguards to ensure the confidentiality, integrity, and security of protected health information. It goes way beyond hospitals to any organization that handles patient data, and the consequences of noncompliance can be anything from fines to criminal charges.
So you guessed it, for this episode, we're getting hip to HIPAA with two experts from the podcasting, naturally, and HIPAA world, co-hosts of the Help Me With HIPAA weekly podcast, Cardin founder Donna Grindle, and HIPAA for MSPs.com founder David Sims. Donna, David, thank you very much for joining us.
Glad to be here.
Yep, same here.
So we'll take turns really quick to start with, because we always like to introduce our guests first and give a little bit of background. So Donna, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background when it comes to the subject of the day, HIPAA.
Well, I've been around the block a little bit. So I started in healthcare in the late 80s. When I was a child, I started working in healthcare. And as a developer, that was what I got my start in. And I've been running my own company since 98 and kind of just went along, and HIPAA became part of it. And then I realized no one really understood it. And since 2012, that's really what I've focused on, is no longer just general healthcare and IT supporting everything. It's HIPAA, and that's all I do, teaching everybody else how to do it.
And it seems like there's plenty of time and subject matter to cover there. So.
Well, yeah, a lot of people say that I was at the right place at the right time. It just depends on how you look at it. I could have been at the wrong place if you consider what it involves. But, we spend a lot of time just getting people to really understand what HIPAA means. And, today's world, everybody's throwing it around left and right. And David and I talk about that a good bit on the podcast these days. They don't understand it.
David, how about yourself?
So I started in the business world actually at the same time Donna did, just, opposite ends of the planet, so to speak. I started out in IT back in 98, and I went through all the iterations that a lot of IT companies go through if they've been around that long, which is everything from retail storefronts to, selling to consumers, to selling to commercial, to consulting. And then, when the MSP world came around, switch into that. And then now our latest iteration is was considered the MSSP, which is a more security-focused MSP. And as you mentioned, one of the things that kind of came out of Donna and I meeting each other was the HIPAA for MSPs website, where we actually train other managed service providers and IT providers on HIPAA compliance. So we're kind of like the peanut butter and chocolate thing, we kind of ran into each other one day, and man, it just tasted good. So we just kept doing it.
Right, so we tend to work with a lot of organizations that are on the smaller side. So, little two-person offices, anywhere up to maybe 50 people. And for a lot of these small businesses especially, HIPAA is pretty much just a checkbox to them. If they can find the quickest, easiest, cheapest way to get it done, they'll do that. So what's your opinion on that viewpoint? How often do you run into this where people have reduced this entire law into just a checkbox to mark off?
Just a minute ago, I ran into, it's like constant as far as we're concerned. David comes up with these great stories when he talks to prospects about, just asking somebody that claims they got HIPAA covered, and David's talking to them as a prospect, and he says, great, when was your last risk analysis? And how does that go, David?
Well, I've kind of coined a new term in the industry where MSP doesn't stand for managed services provider. It actually stands for minimum service provider in some cases. And this is one of those areas where I see that happening. And you just mentioned it. They're trying to do the check the box compliance. And, I don't know about most MSPs, but I don't want to go to a client and say, I just want you to know, doing the absolute minimum necessary to get you by. So, make sure you realize that when you're making your payment every month, I'm doing absolutely the minimum. It's just not something I want to do. And I don't think MSPs really want to do that. They just don't understand the difference between what is the check the box compliance and what is actually required. And so they go for the path of least resistance.
Most of the time if they do have anything, it's where they ran a scan and did a gap analysis, meaning HIPAA says you're supposed to do this. Are you doing this? Yes. Okay. That's it. We're done. Mm-hmm. And that, if you do that part wrong, everything else you do is wrong anyway. So we see it that everyone wants to do the easy thing, but as our podcast says, HIPAA is not about compliance. This is actually about patient care. So checking a box doesn't protect your patient.
Yeah. It's kind of funny that in IT, when a client says something about a problem they're having, we typically just, don't believe them. We want to see it for ourselves. We want to, be able to see the issue, and, we don't really take their word for it. But when it comes to compliance, it's often just the opposite. It's like, yeah, they said they're doing it, so we're good.
So expanding on that statement, Donna, that you mentioned, not about compliance, about patient care. So how does really embracing HIPAA enhance patient care?
Well, it's one now in the larger hospital facilities, they call it impact to patient safety. But there is a group, and the work that the CSA 405D group is doing when they put out a guide that we call it HICCUP, but HICP. And one of the really important things this group was doing was to say securing patient information. They never mention HIPAA, ever. They talk about the impact it has on patients and your ability to care for patients. So when we look at HIPAA and it's all about confidentiality, integrity, and availability, well, if I violate a patient's confidentiality, which, by the way, an airline captain asking somebody why they think they can't wear a mask has nothing to do with HIPAA. Let's just get that out of the way. That's constantly they're bringing HIPAA into this mass discussion.
Yeah.
No, HIPAA doesn't have anything to do with you and that. Only people that have to pay attention to HIPAA are those that meet the requirements of HIPAA, and it's very specific. It's not all healthcare people, so let's just get that out there. But if the patient can't trust that they can tell their doctor, their healthcare provider, everything because it might get out in the community, are we going to be able to properly care for the patient? I'm going to say no. If their information is out in the community and that creates stress and problems for them, also a problem. And if their information is stolen and they have identity theft, or even worse, medical identity theft, now I've got even more problems for these patients. So I'm creating harm at that moment. Then if I don't have integrity, if I can't trust the medical chart, how can I make a decision about caring for a patient? That kind of makes sense right there. Mm-hmm. And then the last piece of availability is if I need the patient chart to make decisions and I can't get to it because it's gone and I never will see it again, which we do have those cases, unfortunately. How can I properly care for the patient? That is what HIPAA is about.
Right. I rarely hear the accessibility aspect of HIPAA discussed, and it's interesting that you bring that up. Obviously, hospitals and other healthcare facilities are a huge target for ransomware specifically. And so it being in situations where you don't have access to, as you said, important data like a person's chart or medical history could spell real disaster.
Well, yes, and the other piece that they point out in this guide, and this is why I love using it, because it doesn't use HIPAA at all. In fact, that was part of the directive, is to not mention HIPAA because of everybody's attitude about, oh, I just checked the box and you're making me do things. But it narrows down the 5 threats, and really all businesses face these 5 threats, except for the last one, which has to do with medical devices. And people don't get, what if a network is hacked and they're able to get to the heating and air just to the heating and air in a hospital, and they take the heat and turn it way up in a surgical facility, and you can't turn it down. There's a reason those surgery rooms are very cold. If you've ever had surgery, that's the last thing you remember is, I am freezing. But if they did that, what if they hacked into, and this has been done, where they've proven the case that they could get into an insulin distribution device and overdo it or underdo it. They've been able to show that they can get into MRI machines and tested radiologist diagnosis. In some cases, they took a tumor out, and others they put it in electronically. And in every case, pretty much, they fell for it. They diagnosed it improperly. And only because they trust the devices. And these things are connected everywhere. So in healthcare, people don't remember there's way more on the network today than just, what we think of as information systems.
Yeah, definitely a consequence of switching to more of a paperless world and everything.
Well, and innovation.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's kind of a double-edged sword sometimes.
Yeah. It's cool. Look what I can do.
So just bouncing back a little bit, you mentioned the mask situation, a mask being asked, reason not to wear a mask by a pilot or by anyone really is not HIPAA violation. But you run into the people who want to check the box. Are there people who do need to comply with HIPAA, but maybe don't even know that they need to or ignore it?
Well, we run into that a bunch, don't we, David? What is it? What's HIPAA schmippa?
Yeah, sometimes it's not that they don't realize they're supposed to do it. They just don't care they're supposed to do it.
So we do have that. But one of the things that I think a lot of people miss, and it hasn't really come up yet, but we know it eventually will, particularly with MSPs. Let's say, and the number of times that David and I have heard this is amazing. Do you worry about HIPAA? Well, no, I don't do any healthcare. Well, who do you work with? I work with accounting firms and law firms. Do you know whether they have to do HIPAA? Well, no, they would tell me. No, they won't. They don't necessarily know. So that comes into play because the business associate tail, if you will, keeps going. It never stops until there's no PHI. So as an MSP, if I am doing business with a business that is maybe an accounting firm, collections, payments, there's a long list, software companies, and what they do requires them to have access to PHI. Now they're a business associate, and if I, as my business and an MSP, it's really hard as an MSP to not have complete control of a network. And the minute I have complete control of the network, don't I pretty much, I would need to be worried about HIPAA. I always love that. I don't touch the EHR. David and I run into that all the time. I don't have to worry about HIPAA because I don't touch the EHR. Do you have complete control of the network? Well, yeah, of course I do. I'm managing the network. Do you have complete control of the firewall? Of course I do, because I manage the network. Okay, if I gave that to someone else, would you call it a breach of the network, a security breach? Well, of course. Well, there you go. That's how you define it.
Yeah. So, Donna, you mentioned the training that doesn't mention HIPAA as a way to get the point across to people. But, David, when you deal with the people who just want to check the box or want to ignore it, how do you sort of get them on board with the need for a more comprehensive compliance setup with HIPAA?
Well, before I answer that, I think it's funny that the opposite side of what Donna's talking about is I often come in contact with clients who swear up and down that they fall under HIPAA and then, come to find out they don't. Mm-hmm. And so there's, not all health information is protected health information, and people don't realize that oftentimes. So it does come down a lot of times to us as the managed service provider or managed security service provider to figure that out for them. And then that way we can make sure that we're going in the right direction. But to answer your question, we don't come in talking about HIPAA. We come in talking about privacy and security. We talk about the results of what HIPAA provide and not what HIPAA is. Mm-hmm. And so coming at it from a results-oriented standpoint, the results being better security, better privacy, protecting your patients, they are very interested in those things. They're not very interested in HIPAA. They're not interested in compliance. They see those things as barriers to doing their job, barriers to dealing with patients. And a lot of times HIPAA gets a black eye because people don't understand it. And every time they decide to say, we can't do something, they blame HIPAA. We can't give you this because of HIPAA. We can't show you that because of HIPAA.
Right.
And more times than not, it's inaccurate. We're seeing that right now. You mentioned the thing about the airlines, and people can't ask about why you're not wearing a mask because of HIPAA. And that's, a crock. So we just stay away from the compliance conversation initially and really go for the results of what compliance does. And then at some point we turn around and go, hey, guess what? You've been doing HIPAA. And they're like, oh, wow, it's not as bad as I thought. And then they're kind of open to having the conversation at that point.
So now that we've moved into these new times of COVID, we've got quite a bit of IT and network security systems sort of turned over on their head with so many employees working from home. People connecting remotely, everybody's sort of off premise at this point, so to speak. What kind of new compliance challenges have developed over the last 5-6 months to all these changes?
Oh, well, we got two big issues. We got everybody's remote, yes, but the other issue we have is that overnight, the industry implemented telehealth, telemedicine, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Overnight. And it was terrifying and amazing to participate in helping make those decisions to move people to the ability to work online and treat patients remotely. And it's been quite interesting and challenging just to hear how they perceive it. My favorite questions were, is it all HIPAA okay if I do this? And then OCR came out with guidance saying, well, we're going to limit how much our enforcement, what was the phrase, David? Enforcement discretion.
Yeah.
We're going to use our discretion to not enforce the HIPAA requirements if you're using these tools for telehealth because they don't meet the HIPAA requirements.
Yeah.
They haven't eased that yet, but we told and advised everybody, don't go there.
Right.
Don't go there because once you go, you'll never get them back.
Don't do anything you want. You're not willing to do over and over and over again.
Right. And so that has been a huge challenge because a lot of groups had the ability to work from home for some people. Now, we did see a massive increase worldwide, industry-wide, however you want to look at it, a huge increase in naked RDP. And we all know what that does. It's just leaving them wide open for these brute force attacks. They're coming in with the vulnerabilities, and that is a huge mistake. So we spent a lot of time, IT's setting it up so we can do remote. Okay, wait, need to know how. Let's talk about this.
Yeah.
And David had people, he was trying to get them. What was the one? David called a client and says, are you guys, ready for COVID or coronavirus or whatever we were talking about at that time? And one of his clients said, well, we don't do infectious disease, so we're not worried about it.
Our wings staying open.
Yeah, it was early on, and I think there were a lot of businesses that didn't understand how this was going to impact them at all.
Yeah. We were talking about it in February.
Yeah, but I think to your question, if you ask us, 6 months from now or a year from now, what's the impact of all this? I think we may have a different answer because I think we're just now kind of seeing some of the impacts. And as people go back to work and start back to what is the normalcy that we're going to see on the other side of this, we're probably not going to know how bad things got until 6 months or so out, because the breaches that have happened now and during this, we won't even know because they have not even been discovered yet. And then when they're all found out, we'll start hearing about it. So you're probably a year out from understanding how things just really didn't go very well for some folks during this.
Yeah, we're not really in the after action period just yet, unfortunately. Going back to the mask compliance not being a HIPAA question, I think another common issue that comes up is also relating to the positive tests versus privacy. So say an employer has a staff member who tests positive. How do they handle that, and how does HIPAA come into play in a case like that?
That is a fact-specific determination.
If the employer is covered under HIPAA and the employee is being treated by their office, then they are a patient and it's PHI. So you have to handle it under HIPAA, which is different. Mm-hmm. But the vast majority of cases are not going to be that.
Right.
But you do want to protect the privacy of your staff. And as David said, it's a fact-specific determination, because you also have businesses that are self-employed, which means they have a section of the business that is the insurance company that the business owns or runs. So you might have that to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
But then in general, this is a public health issue. And I think a lot of people are losing that point. Is it's a public health issue. This is not a political issue. This is not, it is public health. And there are mechanisms built in for contact tracing and notifications and those kind of things that don't require employers to do anything other than report it to public health. And as well as the physicians and all of those. Now, during these hot spot outbreaks, it becomes very concerning because there's just such a volume. Then we all have to, make the tough decisions then. But in most cases, if you are an employer and you have someone and you're not sure what to do, contact the public health, your local public health department, and ask them about contact tracing.
Right.
Because you can get involved in that. But in a small company, all of a sudden, if there's only 5 of you, everybody's going to have to be quarantined. There's no ifs, ands, or buts.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't have to go into the details about how so-and-so got it unless so-and-so wants to tell you about it. You can just say, look, we've been exposed. It's been confirmed. And now we all have to do this, and this is how we're going to do it. And you just have to be prepared. We have clients, obviously, working in healthcare. There's a lot of exposure going on. And we have groups that'll have multiple offices and had to shut down an entire office because everybody there was exposed or positive. Just that one location had to be shut down. But that was because of it. And so you have to, as David said, it's a fact-specific determination. Every single case requires consideration.
So that really extends even to some of the more high-profile situations. Like right now, for instance, as we speak, Major League Baseball has been dealing with some cases popping up on specific teams. Their policy is not to, say person X has it or player X has it, player X doesn't have it, but they're basically doing this on kind of a discretionary basis based on, whatever agreements they made between themselves and the union, I would guess then.
Yes. I mean, that is a contract between your employer and your employee. And in professional sports, they are allowed to set a contract that says we get to make announcements about your health that could impact your ability to play. Mm-hmm. And we've had episodes where we talk specifically about professional athletes and HIPAA. Who was it, David? It was I know you remember it.
It was one of the football players you're talking about?
Oh, yeah.
I know. I think it happened to Cam Newton, but that's not the one you're talking about.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that one too. So, yeah, there's multiple cases, but I think the Jason Pierre-Paul is the one, JPP.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And the fireworks.
Yeah, they're like, I'm not saying he has COVID. I'm just saying you're not going to see him for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
that's what they're doing.
Kind of that. Yeah. And in that case, and it's the same thing. If the hospital or the doctor's office or the insurance company or the pharmacy, any of those people, if they're telling you they have it, that's a violation of HIPAA. Mm-hmm. But anybody else tells you, they're not violating HIPAA.
So earlier you mentioned when you walk into these conversations, one thing you do is sort of not talk about the compliance aspect so much as the privacy aspect. What are some other similar telltale signs of, I guess, a good MSP when it comes to HIPAA compliance? What are you guys looking for? How can you signal to somebody that you're actually going to go further than just a checkbox and really delve into this?
I'll start, I guess. There's some things that I guess we know to look for that the public doesn't really know much to look for. Like, for example, if I see anything on your website that says something about being HIPAA certified, right off the bat, you have no idea what you're talking about. But, for the general public, for prospects that may be looking into it, we're looking at, again, we're not looking at talking about HIPAA as much as we're talking about the results of what HIPAA provide. And we have a full-blown business associate due diligence questionnaire that we have. Actually came from Cardin. Donna put it together, her team. And the questionnaire is pretty extensive as to not just us saying, yeah, we follow HIPAA and, we got you covered, but it gets down into a lot of the detail about this is how we do it. And we're not giving away any kind of quote unquote industry secrets. It's just talking about what we're doing and how we're protecting patient information, which is what a covered entity that's hiring you should be doing anyway. They should be doing a due diligence on you to make sure that you are doing what you say your business associate agreement says you're going to be doing. And so we just provide that up front. And that's typically a very good place to start. And it also kind of puts all the other MSPs on their heels.
Right. Well, and for us, is just like David said, we have the questionnaire. And often we go in and so many times, the vendor is going to assume that I'm there to call the baby ugly or try to run them off, or I don't care. I want to work with every MSP out there, because the more that do it right, the better off we all are. And my objective is to protect the business and protect the patients all down the line, whether it's a business associate or a covered entity. And so we do have that questionnaire, and it's simple things like, do you understand that HIPAA applies to you? It's the first question. And you wouldn't believe people that have said, not applicable. But you signed a business associate agreement. Why'd you sign it? But then the questions get to, who is your security officer and privacy officer if you have both? And then what training have they had? And people just go insane. And those are the red flags to us. You should be able to tell me, not that my entire staff was trained yesterday when you sent me this questionnaire and we did, trainmetoday.com on HIPAA training, and that's the training my security officers had. Okay. Then clearly you probably don't understand all of the little details that the security officer is supposed to understand, because they're supposed to be able to implement these policies and procedures. And it's way more than passwords and antivirus and all of that today. And the minute you start asking those questions, I'm going to learn pretty quickly. When did you do a security risk analysis? Well, I did one this week. Okay. What method did you use? I've had people send in, and it's tech people, so they knew they were yelling when they send it in all caps. It's not like my father-in-law. And this is proprietary. You have no right to ask me these things. And okay, all I said was, what method did you use? That's it. What method? That's proprietary? No. But all of that is screaming at me that you don't understand it and you don't take it seriously. And so our questions are not, yes, they're specific. What method did you use? Not just, did you do one? And when was the last one you did? And if that was in the last 6 months, when was the one you did prior to that? Those are the questions that we ask. I don't need you to show me the inner workings unless things aren't making sense. Most of the time then I just don't even ask. I'm like, could you clarify this or that if it's close? But it's unfortunate. What I would expect to see is someone that understands the requirements and welcomes someone else so that they're not taking on the liability that they don't even realize they're taking on. That's something that's really confusing. Is if I go to the client and they say, well, IT handles all of HIPAA, right away, there's an issue.
Right.
Because they shouldn't. And if I go to IT and they say, well, yeah, we did a risk analysis. What did it have on it? What method did you use? And if it's a gap analysis, which is just asking the questions, and we just had a huge group where we did our assessment, which is my favorite line, is a client said that your assessment is like a colonoscopy without anesthesia. Yes, it is. But we're going to find everything. And with our assessment, we come back and we say, well, this is high risk, this is high risk, high risk. And she's like, the compliance officer said, well, last year our IT company did it and they said we were all low risk. How is it you're high risk and there hasn't been a lot of issues? Well, they ask you, do you have a policy on X, Y, and Z? And you said, yes. I asked you, and then I said, please supply it. And you gave it to me, and it had nothing to do with that. And in fact, you don't have a policy on it.
Before we let you go, we want to talk a little bit more about your podcast, the Help Me With HIPAA podcast. We talked before we started recording that you're celebrating a 5-year anniversary, more than 250 episodes, more than 260 episodes now, actually. So tell us a little bit about the genesis of the podcast and what people can expect if they have not listened before.
It's David's fault. Let him tell you.
It all started one day when Donna and I were having several discussions about compliance, and and client issues and all that. And I said, you know what? People should hear these conversations. They're pretty good. And so I said, we should do a podcast. And I don't even know if Donna had even listened to podcasts at the time. So she's like, yeah, that sounds like more work for me to do. I don't know that I'm interested in that. And so I don't even know how we ended up. I got her agreement on it. I don't know how, but we decided to start recording the conversations. And next thing you know, we have a show that's talking about HIPAA initially. And nowadays, even though we still cover HIPAA and it has a bend toward that, we do talk a lot about cybersecurity and privacy issues. And we have quite a few people who listen to the podcast who they email us and say, I have nothing to do with HIPAA. I'm not in healthcare, but there's so much information that's good security awareness information and all that. And that's why I listen. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
That and our reviews say, honestly, you laugh. Really, you do.
Yeah, it's pretty hilarious.
Yeah, well, I mean, judging from this conversation, I can tell, it's good to approach everything with a little bit of a sense of humor and definitely get the rapport between the two of you. So listen to a few myself getting ready for this one. Definitely would recommend that our folks head over there. I know that your latest episode was about security awareness training, which, as you said, you have kind of the HIPAA slant coming in, but security awareness training, that's for everybody.
Well, we hope it is.
It needs to be, right?
Eat your spinach.
Eat your broccoli. That's all we want you to do. So, yeah, it's definitely about what privacy and security is required. And we are talking to many other businesses that HIPAA isn't required. But you know what? Their business partners want to know, are you taking care of this and not just checking the box anymore? Now they want to see. Let me see your summary report from your security risk analysis that you've told me the last 3 years you did. It's coming for everybody.
It's coming.
David's going to change the podcast to help me with our thing.
Just help me. Thanks very much, Donna and David, for joining us. Anywhere you want to send people to learn more about what you do?
Well, there's helpmewithhipaa.com, which is the podcast, and we do a HIPAA boot camp that our virtual one is full for this year, but you can keep track of that. It's a 3-day intensive, but you will learn things. TheHIPAABootcamp.com. And then my company is Cardon, Kardon, and HQ is in high quality, David says. That's what it stands for. High quality, help quick, or headquarters, whatever is apparent that you need at that moment when you're typing it.
There you go.
Yep. And you can find out more about HIPAA for MSPs at HIPAA4MSPs.com. That's all spelled out. And HIPAA does have 1 P, not 2.
Hallelujah.
So, yeah, as your opener suggested, it is, the hip thing to do. So
I'm sure you've never heard that pun before.
That's actually how we get people started at the boot camp. Usually, understanding is we do the cheer. The one side of the room does hip, the other one does ah. So, yep, definitely that. And our IT company is Security First IT. Again, all spelled out. So if you're looking for any kind of compliance training and you're in the IT industry, then check out HIPAA for MSPs.
All righty. Well, thanks so much, both of you, for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
It's been fun.
Now it's time for headlines. In this regular segment, we take a look at the top stories in the cybersecurity world and talk about what they may mean to you. Starting with headline number 1. Much of the internet went down. Here is the reason why. So as we were prepping our headlines, Andrew, you called this the bad news episode, and this was one of those high-profile bad news stories that led to the comments. So spoiler alert, there are others coming up as well. So on a mid-July afternoon/evening, depending on your location, I guess morning somewhere too, right?
Sure.
You may have wanted to place a food delivery order or check the latest political news or throw a few bucks to your favorite content creator. But for over 25 minutes, which seems like an eternity online, you probably couldn't do that.
25 minutes, that's about 10,000 refresh clicks. So Yeah, so actually we here at Firewalls.com briefly went offline for this exact reason. So the reason was Cloudflare, one of the world's largest providers of secure domain name systems, or DNS services. They suffered an outage, not 100% sure why, but there are some theories and so forth that we will further explain. But it did, as you say, take down quite a large swath of the internet. Cloudflare is a huge provider for several domains. So Discord, League of Legends, Medium, Patreon, a lot of different places went down. And usually when one of these services go down, there's a lot of different websites connected or otherwise integrated into it, which also experiences some interruptions.
Yeah, Politico, Shopify, which powers all sorts of different e-commerce sites. Deliveroo is a big food delivery site in the UK as well. So all over the world, people were affected. And, the first thought that everyone has when something like this happens is some sort of cyber attack.
Right.
So you maybe worry about it being targeted for a DDoS attack or something like that. But Cloudflare came out really the day after this occurred and basically laid it all out, at least from their perspective. So if you believe what Cloudflare has to say, and so far it doesn't necessarily seem to be a reason not to, they said it was not due to an attack, but due to what do you think? What's the other way that we lose all sorts of...
Oh, gosh, nothing that we'd talk about on this show, certainly.
No, it's the magic word, configuration, a configuration error. So that caused all of the traffic for Cloudflare to route through one location in Atlanta, and that in turn overwhelmed the Atlanta location and nearly 20 other locations that are connected to this Atlanta backbone all around the world to fail.
Right, so this was basically a congestion easing type of update, and supposedly there was, I believe they said, a typo. That's where my confusion comes from here. They're literally just somebody switched a letter around, and this caused all this.
Well, so the way I understand it is they were working on something to ease congestion, and I'm thinking that maybe in the code that they were writing or something, that's where the typo was, and the typo made it do the exact opposite of what they were intending. So, and they meant to say closed instead of open, or who knows. But
if I had a nickel for every time I've destroyed our website with a typo.
Kind of funny piece of writing in this particular article, which we will have the link to in the description. The writer of this piece calls the configuration error a bigger version of someone tripping over the server power supply plug and pulling it out, because I kind of see that with a typo, because that's pretty much what it is. It's just one little mistake that causes big problems.
Right. It's one of those, that's nothing big, and then it unrolls into a worldwide story. So it's one of those little oopsies.
Yeah. So you wonder if it is a typo, as in a spell check kind of typo, or maybe they just typed the wrong word.
They falsed something that should have been true.
Yeah, right.
And the company said it's made changes so that it can't happen again. I'm not 100% sure how you prevent human error, but they have
if
apparently
they've cracked
the case.
Wow. That seems like they should bottle that and market it somehow.
Right. So as you said, the sites were down for 25 minutes, but sort of the unfolding congestions and different services involved, it was about upwards of an hour or so before everything sort of massaged its way out of the system.
Yeah, going back to how it can't happen again, I don't know if there's some kind of a fail-safe situation, or maybe are you sure you're going to do this, or read this again?
Proofreader has been hired.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, the positive about this is something that we've talked about in other situations where things haven't gone well for a company. A lot of companies like to sweep things under the rug, or deny, pretend nothing's happening, or, maybe even
delay and drag their feet.
Give out false information. That does happen sometimes. But Cloudflare, they posted a detailed bit of information about exactly what happened from their perspective here. And they did it quickly, which is important, because then it doesn't go on. It leads to less
time for
speculation.
hypothesizing.
Yeah. And for the most part, the story was done in that couple of day period, though we're talking about it a little bit after. Sorry,
We're saying nice things about them. this time. Good work, Cloudflare. Keep being transparent.
On to headline number 2. The Twitter hack shows a major cybersecurity vulnerability. So on to bad news story number 2. Another pretty prominent issue that was hard not to notice in July. Several major Twitter accounts, not Mater Twitter accounts.
The cars.
No,
Yeah.
cars 1,
Just
2, or 3. I don't know if car can actually tweet. I guess you could do voice to text, right? So several major Twitter accounts were hacked with what's being called a coordinated social engineering attack. And when I say major, I do mean major. Former President Barack Obama, future President Kanye West were among the victims as well, along with Bill Gates, Elon Musk, and many, many more.
Right. Apparently, Elon Musk actually personally called Jack Dorsey after finding out that his account was hacked and said he was experiencing food poisoning at the time of the news. So he would have had an especially bad night.
Wonder if it was like extra sensory kind of thing, like he just had a feeling, and so it made him sick at the same time.
Tingled on him. The strange thing about this case being as major as it was is that the sort of payoff and outcome wasn't all that major after all.
In this case, we do actually have somebody who is after money, which is not always the case. Sometimes we have these hacks. We talked about the NFL hack a while back, which was used to sort of obliquely promote a cybersecurity website, actually. Right. In this case, it was a crypto scam that targeted the millions upon millions of followers that these folks had. And the hacker or hackers responsible did gain a reported $120,000 or so in Bitcoin, which is not insignificant. But
right. And I've heard tell that a lot of these cases, the hackers will actually put some sort of seed money in the account to make it look a little more legitimate, make people feel like they're not the only ones actually paying for this scam. And so who knows how much it was actually the hackers' money to begin with.
Right.
It's not that I want this to have been a bigger case, but it's a little bit of a letdown, isn't it? Yeah, one of the biggest hacks of the century. A little Bitcoin scam. That's all they can do with it.
Yeah. On the other side of things, people knew fairly quickly that something was wrong. Right. I don't think they're used to President Obama asking for anything from them, except maybe to sign up for charitable service or something like that.
Right. And I believe the minimum payment being accepted for this scam was $1,000 in Bitcoin. So I'm not sure who's smart enough to purchase and transfer Bitcoin and use Twitter, but also to fall for such a old school double your money scheme.
Yeah.
It's a small demographic of people, I'm sure.
Apparently 120 people if they all donated $1,000.
I suppose so.
Or put in $1,000. But the breach has been traced to the hackers' access of an internal chat channel on Slack, an actual internal Twitter chat channel, I should say. So knowledge of Twitter's corporate structure and its employees' roles and communication styles likely made the attack smarter and helped plan and affect the breach. The New York Times is saying that the hacker was someone known as Kirk. Don't know if William Shatner was involved.
As far as the hacker nicknames we've had on this show, Kirk's a little stale.
Yeah, it's better than no nickname at all, I guess.
True.
But
maybe that other guy.
Yeah. The specifics, though, of the actual social engineering that was used for this hacker to gain access to Twitter, that's unknown, other than the fact that it was involving reconnaissance, which Verizon says is a technique used in 90% of attacks. Reconnaissance, I think you can kind of figure out what that means. It just means that the attacker is doing a lot of due diligence research and following somebody around online, figuring out how they can use what they know.
Right, and this article does go pretty deep to those kinds of concerns and give a little education on what kind of recon not just being done, but is usable. It's a lot wider reaching than you think. Things like vacation photos on Facebook, just blog articles, personal things that you take and do in your free time can be used against you at work if hackers are able to, for example, emulate your writing style.
Maybe they know where you've been with the vacation photos. So we've gone over the big details of the Twitter hack, which was a big story in and of itself. But the article that we're actually working off of is from Slate, and it's using the Twitter hack. as a way to make a little bit of a broader point. So basically, the point is that data is everywhere.
Right. They call it a growing ocean of information in this article specifically, but, we've all been using the internet for years and years now across probably dozens of platforms and websites, each of us, where we've, littered the internet with information about ourselves saying, hey, look at me, here's my favorite food and my mother's maiden name and all those other security questions that you can now answer if you look far enough back into my history. And that does seem to be the gist of the problem, is what do we do now that there's this sort of filled orbit of all of our personal data?
Yeah, we talked about how certain data can be used based on the fact that it's widely available. But the broader point, in addition to the fact that the data is everywhere, is that the weak spot in any organization is still, unfortunately, the human element. So I guess that Cloudflare may not have cracked that after all. In this case, the human element is the data from humans being everywhere and hackers finding the data from specific humans to be able to find their way into a larger organization, a business network.
Yeah, spear phishing, business email compromise, these are all sort of symptoms of this larger issue that people can go and emulate your writing style, see who you usually contact, who you've been sending emails back and forth with, maybe even determine if you needed money transferred or so forth, who would you go ask in that case, figure out who your boss is and how they usually ask for money.
Yeah, it talks about in the article, even CEO of Twitter, Jack Dorsey, who Musk had already emailed, was also a victim of an attack that involved impersonation in recent years as well. So all of this stuff is out there, and all of it is available for an enterprising hacker. So this really makes the bad news part of the bad news headline sound a little bit scarier, I think, because there are measures that you can take, but it's hard to really fully protect yourself against something like this happening.
It's true, and there's all sorts of different scams and schemes you'll see this be used for, and like you said, I'm not sure there is a silver bullet. I guess you can verbally distribute special code words to all your friends and associates, but that could be hard to track.
And then you have to remember them all, too.
Yeah, write them in a notebook and hope you don't lose it.
Because the other thing that you can do with the data is just reach out and contact somebody. So if the hacker doesn't want to go to the trouble of impersonating them and creating a false identity, they can go find person X who works in a specific spot in a big organization and say, hey, I'll give you $100 if you send me your password or something like that. And so all of these are vulnerabilities that are hard for even the best network security setup to help you prevent, help you patch up.
Yeah, and you don't even really know what could be the cause for a sort of insider attack like this. For the one that we're talking about now with Twitter, we're still not really sure if there was in fact an inside employee that helped. What his motivation was? He, just disgruntled? Was there, like you said, a payoff involved?
Mm-hmm.
Who knows?
Right. Or was it even intentional at all?
Right.
Just
it could
don't
be
know.
Completely, he just got tricked and clicked on something and felt dumb that day.
And so the article suggests, really, it's more of a call to action than reassurance right now. But the call to action is that next-gen cybersecurity tools really need to focus on cyber hygiene. So that's providing visibility into what information about a company and its employees is available in the public, because one way that people know who to track is by knowing who works for who, and finding ways to reduce or anesthetize the footprint of those employees and the company, protecting the companies and the privacy and integrity of each individual.
Right, and it'll be interesting to see how that plays out against social media, places like LinkedIn, where, connecting and showing off everything you know about people is kind of the whole point.
Yeah, it's a definite trade-off, and it'll be hard to see how that balances the other direction. But it just shows, hackers are paying attention, and they're looking for ways to exploit any kind of vulnerability that's out there. And even if you're posting that vacation pic, you just got to be careful. On to headline number 3. This story has evolved considerably in the days leading up to our recording, but it's another bad news one unless you're a TomTom fan.
boy.
You remember TomTom?
I sure do, Kev.
So Garmin experienced some service interruptions over the past week leading up to our recording for this podcast. Garmin, you may know as the purveyor of not only those old GPS driving navigation systems, but now it's more known for fitness-related wearables, also navigation for planes, or maybe for specific uses like hiking, boating, golfing, and other things of that nature. So Garmin had a problem, which it initially called an outage or a maintenance issue, depending on where you looked, that caused some of its services not to work properly. And then after a few days of speculation, Garmin did finally admit that it was the victim of a cyber attack, which encrypted some of their systems.
Right, and they still have not come out and outright said it was ransomware, even though that's, all signs point to yes in that case. Unlike our earlier story, they've tried to keep a little bit of this hush-hush and limited their transparency in what exactly happened. So sources at TechRadar have, in fact, though, reached out to employees suspected to be involved in this to sort of get a better picture of what's really going on inside.
Yeah, and those employees are painting the picture of ransomware. You can even connect the dots between what Garmin has admitted to. Say that you're a victim of a cyber attack which encrypted some systems. It's pretty much the definition of ransomware, as long as there is actually a ransom involved. So some reports were even suggesting that the ransom being demanded was $10 million. Sources say the files were being locked under the title Garmin Wasted, and attackers demanded a ransom fee for unlocking each one. The attacker is believed to be the Russian-based Evil Corp, no relation to Mr. Robot, though probably is related to Mr. Robot in a way, based on just deciding on what name to use. And the ransomware being used is suspected to be a Wasted Locker.
Right, and Wasted Locker, a bit of good news in this otherwise bleak episode. It does not appear to be able to actually steal or extricate any data from the locked files, so hopefully if you're worried about hackers in Russia knowing where you went for a jog this morning, they will not be able to pull that info. They've only been able to encrypt it and withhold.
Yeah, and Garmin has said all along adamantly that no user data was accessed, lost, or stolen. And even the Garmin products themselves were not affected, only the access to various online services, syncing that jog, and things of that nature.
Right, Garmin seems to have focused more on the more essential business aspects of getting this fixed up and quickly. So stuff like navigation for pilots, etc. That was pretty quickly put up, and there are still a few services that aren't quite back yet, but gradually returning.
So there were reports that Garmin has actually obtained an encryption key. There's also other information suggesting that Garmin was quickly able to shut down some devices in a data center to prevent them from being encrypted when the attack was first known. So it's possible it was able to just keep the backups isolated.
Yeah, it's odd that as recently as yesterday, somebody said they were able to obtain an encryption key, which if you backed up from your data center, you wouldn't need that encryption key in the first place. So there's a bit of two sides of the story, and still sort of waiting for the shakeout of which is which.
Right, and an encryption key would normally come from the people doing the encrypting, and if you haven't paid them, you probably wouldn't obtain that encryption key either. So that's another layer of this story. But going back to the transparency issue that we talked about relating to Cloudflare versus Garmin trying to keep this away from sounding like a hack. They are concerned about, obviously, their reputation. Certainly, customers will potentially have pause if they see that a ransomware attack affected anything. And that's why Garmin's been very careful to point out that they have not lost any customer data or exposed any customer data. That's something that would really cause some problems for future potential customers.
Right, and I wasn't aware that, I guess I sort of assumed Garmin was still around in its certain ways, but I didn't realize that they had these apps reaching into things like navigation for pilots and boats, and specifically golfing took me for a loop. I'm not a golfer, Kevin, I don't know if you are, but why would you need GPS to play golf? It seems pretty, you could look around and see.
Yeah. Maybe it's some sort of rugged outdoor golfing or something like that.
Deep wilderness golf.
Yeah, deep wilderness golf where you actually have to geotag the hole, or maybe they just assume that some of the golfers are so bad that they will not be able to find the hole from each swing. So I guess the actual reason for having it used for golf would be maybe judging yardage and things like that from wherever you may be standing. Thanks for listening to this episode of Ping, a Firewalls.com podcast. And thanks again to Help Me With HIPAA co-hosts Donna Grindle and David Sims for joining us today. You can check out the Help Me With HIPAA podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, and check out the links in our description for more information about everything that we discussed. Subscribe or follow now, however you listen, to ensure you get our latest episodes as soon as they're available, and please do rate and review us. Visit Firewalls.com for all your network security needs, and give us a follow on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. For Andrew Harmon, I'm Kevin Baxter. We'll be back soon with another episode, but in the meantime, we remind you to
Get secure, stay secure.